So good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome. And thank you for coming out this early in the morning. I know I was yawning and stretching like nobody's business just before this. But my name is Katherine. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a student at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia with the Honors College, and then I'm also an English and creative writing student. And so today I will be presenting based off of a paper I wrote entitled That Girl versus New Girl, The Perils of Choice Feminism. Very dramatic title. So I wanted to start out and ask, who here is familiar with New Girl? Do we have any fans? Okay, I figured. So New Girl follows Jess, played by Zooey Deschanel, an elementary school teacher who goes through just the worst breakup that anyone can go through, and subsequently moves into this gorgeous loft with 3 single guys. Obviously, shenanigans, hijinks ensue. This show was created by Elizabeth Merriweather in 2011, and in recent years, I would go so far as to say it's kind of become like a cult classic, definitely very popular. I always see so many clips all across, TikTok, Instagram Reels, all that jazz. The show's sharp humor and quirky protagonists have captured the hearts and minds of many. The show kind of started focused on Jess, but it quickly grew out to becoming more of an ensemble comedy as the supporting actors really just became fan favorites and people loved their dynamic. And then I'm imagining not as many folks are going to be familiar with this show, but maybe you watched it with your grandma, you saw reruns, something like that. This show is from 1966, created by Bill Persky and Sam Denoff, called That Girl. It follows Anne, or Anne Marie, who is an aspiring actress and more of a real-life odd jobber. She's very similar to Jess, both in visuals. They have the same blunt cut bangs and long hair, and then also they're both just very quirky, feisty, girl in the world kind of folks. True to the time period of this show, Anne really has to fight to have any kind of independence, to leave her parents' home. There's several episodes dedicated to that where she's just trying to get out into the city. She feels really progressive for her era, in my opinion. Jess really doesn't feel quite the same way, and that's kind of what we're going to begin to be getting at with this presentation. So, why does this matter? What's the point of all of this? In my opinion, Jess and Anne both represent stereotypical feminine interests and ideals, yet they take on leading roles and independence not always afforded to female characters. This opens them up to feminist readings and critiques in a lot of really interesting ways. And surprisingly, very little scholarly research has been done on either show. There were some great articles I found that will be cited at the end of my bibliography, but really just overall, there's very little that has been done on either of these shows. I think through comparing and contrasting the protagonists of New Girl and That Girl, we can come to better understand the waves of feminism and how feminism interacts with media and popular culture. In particular, New Girl lends itself to a discussion of choice feminism, which I will be talking about a little bit more later on. So, some of y'all, probably most of y'all, might be familiar with what I mean by waves, but let's do a quick little refresher just to be sure. So feminism is divided into waves to discuss different political elements and priorities and demands made by feminist activists and movements at different times throughout history. So right now there is some debate over whether we're in a 3rd wave or we're beginning a 4th wave of feminism. First wave feminism was largely about legal rights. So suffrage, you think of suffragettes, that's first wave feminism. Second wave feminism focused heavily on material rights, like property ownership, Title IX, and campaigning against things like sex-based discrimination. Third wave feminism shifted into focusing more on identity and personal choice, and is intertwined pretty heavily with movements like LGBT+ rights and sex positivity. That Girl takes place during the height of second wave feminism, and New Girl takes place during third wave feminism. Okay, so the assumption might be time has passed. People get more feminist, more liberal, more conscientious, this, that, and the other. You might think that, you might be wrong. This is an issue that we begin to run into a lot with New Girl. Jess is constantly framed as being not like other girls, which you might all be familiar with that expression. She is just quirkiness to the extreme, a sweet, helpless woman child. And not only this, but she is constantly being put into contrast and comparison with other women who also feel like tired sexist stereotypes. New Girl has a big issue with stereotypes, not just when it comes to women, but also when it comes to Black, Jewish, and LGBT characters. Jess herself is a hyper-feminine, inept woman child. And sure, some people are like that. Sometimes people are these things. But we have to consider, is that a liberatory or feminist perspective to be presented on screen? At the end of the day, Jess feels like a sexist stereotype of a woman, one who isn't quite a full person or a full adult. One could defend this as her choice to make, but I think it is essential to remember that Jess is a construction, a character that represents the beliefs and values and humor of writers, not a living, breathing person that I'm just dragging on for no reason. As a character, we can examine the beliefs that Jess personifies and the impact that it might have on our culture. On the other hand, and in another time, That Girl's Anne questions the world around her constantly and pushes to be allowed to exist in ways that were not considered appropriate for women at the time. Significantly, the show doesn't end with her getting married, which was a narrative choice actively campaigned for by the actress who played Anne, Marlo Thomas. Anne was a single, independent woman creating her own path in life. And not only was she one of the first, gals trying to make it in the big city, but she was also more culturally aware and sensitive to her own failings in a way that we really never see with Jess. So, I've used this term a couple of times, it's right there in the title, but let me lay it out and explain kind of what it means and what it matters and why I'm beefing with it so much. Choice feminism essentially says that anything a woman chooses to do is feminist, even if it's contrary to feminist frameworks of women's liberation. Choice feminism defangs feminism. It leaves us little room to demand collective action, stagnates political movement, and ignores the societal factors that shape and influence our choices. When it comes to New Girl, let me be clear. The problem is not that Jess is feminine, or that she rocks a lot of polka dots, or that she breaks for birds. The problem is that her femaleness becomes synonymous with her weakness, and that this perpetuates negative ideas of womanhood. Where Anne works against the limitations put upon her as a woman, Jess embraces and glamorizes sexist depictions of what it means to be a woman. And now, mixing it up a little bit, have some clips. Hopefully they'll play from the right spot. In this scene from season 1, episode 11 of New Girl, Jess is having some conflict with her roommate Nick's girlfriend, Julia. Julia is a very competent, put-together lawyer who isn't quite as into Jess's particular brand of adorkability. Julia is perfectly decent to Jess, let me be clear, even giving her free legal help when Jess gets into a car crash by almost hitting a bird and not hitting a bird. It's a whole goofy thing. But Jess has a problem with Julia because she doesn't line up with what Jess wants and expects from a woman. So what's Jess's reaction? We'll see it here.
I'm about to go and pay this $800 fine, and my checks have baby farm animals on them, bitch. It's the wrong way.
A short clip, but I think it says so much. First of all, just the use of the pejorative bitch against another woman. It's really out of character for Jess and strange and pointed feeling. And then just the overall incompetence she shows, first from just how she got this parking ticket in the first place, and then walking in the wrong direction somehow. I think it's so interesting. There's so much to examine with this clip. And I think it also shows us that New Girl isn't really just showing us, oh, here's another way to be a woman. Here's a woman who happens to be feminine and a little silly. Rather, they're telling us women should be, must be like Jess, inept and saccharine and always hyper-feminine. Especially given the time period, this feels strange and jarring and disappointing.
I'm about to go and pay this $800 fine.
Okay. And then, again, considering time period, it is perhaps even more surprising that That Girl, a show from the 1960s, is wildly more culturally cognizant and respectful. I'm not getting into a whole ton in this presentation, but like I said, there's a ton of issues with how New Girl handles race and sexuality and different elements like that. And That Girl obviously isn't perfect, it's a show from the 60s, but there are really striking moments where they grapple with these difficult ideas and topics. And this is from season 5, episode 12. Anne is considering whether or not to take on the role of a Mexican character that includes a very stereotypical and offensive accent. She then makes this decision of her own accord after a lot of thought.
Accent. Whether it's right or wrong, it really does offend people. And I thought about it, Donald, and in all honesty, I have to admit, if I was Mexican or Latin American, I wouldn't like it either. So, whether I was right or wrong, I just couldn't do it.
Again, it's a short clip, but I think it says a lot that That Girl is having conversations about cultural appropriation ages and ages before other television shows were doing the same. And again, Anne is doing this of her own volition and integrity. I think even just from such short clips as these, you can really see a difference in how the characters kind of carry themselves and present themselves out into the world. And this doesn't mean like Anne isn't fun and feminine and flirty and all of these things that Jess is. She is those things, and she's also like a human being who can think and make decisions.
Accent. Whether it's right or wrong,
Okay, so where do we go from here? What do we take away from this? We need depictions of women that move the needle of progress forward. We can acknowledge, yes, of course, different women have different personal preferences, but we can also seek to examine what is shaping those preferences and work to dismantle these overarching systems of oppression. Our choices do not exist within a vacuum, and neither do our television shows. And now I have some acknowledgements. I want to thank some lovely folks who supported me with this paper and this presentation. And also, if anyone wants to read the whole paper, it's a lot longer. Come up to me, talk to me. I love to talk to folks. But I want to thank Professor Faye Pritchard, Professor Mary Boyes, and the VCU Honors College, and then also the lovely, awesome scholars whose work I used, Emily L. Newman, Meg E. Tully, Kristen L. McAuliffe, Linda Holmes, Rachel Thwaites, Zoe Schechter-Brody, Michaela L. Ferguson. Thank you for your fabulous research. And now I have time for questions. And please be nice. I'm so nervous.